In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, Leif Thulin is back on again. And that is because I wanted to get his thoughts on the prospects who helped themselves or improved their draft stock at the ACC SEC Challenge. So stay tuned to hear Leif's thoughts on some of the biggest risers from two of the Power 6 conferences in college basketball. Stay tuned. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe, the director of scouting for NBA Big Board. And my co-host for today, like I mentioned in the open, is Leif Thulin, the guy that watches more college basketball than anyone else. So you are in your element. College basketball is here. We're starting to get some bigger matchups. The cupcakes are starting to fall off the schedule. And this week we had the ACC SEC Challenge. But before we get into that, I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's just get started with this. ACC SEC Challenge. You have two of the best conferences in college basketball, and you have some pretty intriguing matchups. Which one was the one that stood out to you the most, and which player in that particular game do you feel like helped his draft stock?
Kentucky and Miami was the game that made me think as a college basketball fan, wow, like one of these teams is or has a chance to be really good and better than I thought. And Kentucky boat raced Miami, and Miami made the Final Four last year, made the Elite Eight the year before, was number 8 in the country. Yet it felt like even when Miami made its best run to even take a lead early or late in the first half, that Kentucky was the better team. And typically, I'm usually a critic of John Calipari from a college basketball fan standpoint. Obviously, he's great at producing talent. Like, they have a bunch of guards that are really good in the NBA, but they typically start off the season slowly and get better for their good teams. And it's like, man, shouldn't they be better to begin with? I know they're young, but like you're getting the pick of the litter, and you're getting transfers, and you had the National Player of the Year returning last year in Sheppard. This year's team leads the nation in assist to turnover. They shoot a ton of threes. They rebound. They have a great turnover differential. I
Hold on. I got to cut you off. Kentucky shoots a lot of threes. You know how crazy that sounds?
Oh, I know. I know. As someone who watches a ton of college basketball, it's appalling. But that leads me to my point. They brought in a lot of freshmen, and they're getting back to what Kentucky did best at the beginning of the 2010s decade, where they brought in a lot of freshmen that just fit together, and they would find out who's the guy. And some years it's obvious. It was Anthony Davis in the year that they won the championship, but there are really good players on that team that molded into roles. And now the question with Kentucky, and this is where we talk prospects, is who is that guy? It came in, Justin Edwards was the most highly regarded in NBA draft circles, followed by DJ Wagner, and then Reed Sheppard and Dillingham. Dillingham was probably ahead of Sheppard right now. I don't know if you asked any different evaluator, there's probably 4 different people with 4 different answers for you in that quartet. I think Reed Sheppard, to answer your initial question, was the guy who jumped the most from this challenge, though. He's shooting the lights out, and he was regarded as like he's going to be a long-term Kentucky player. He's going to be one of the most beloved guys. He's going to be there for 4 years. Now people are talking about him being a one and done.
Yeah, me and my brother James just did an episode about him being in the first round conversation, and he was like the forgotten prospect. Because you had, obviously, Justin Edwards, who was number 1 on a lot of boards. He was number 1 on my board in August. Won't be the case when I drop my next big board. You had DJ Wagner. We haven't even talked about Aaron Bradshaw, who was a top 10 recruit on some sites. And then Zvonimir Ivicic, who hasn't played, who I thought was going to be a lottery pick coming into the season after he had a really strong performance at the under 20s. And then I thought Dillingham was the wild card. I didn't think that he would get the freedom to do what he does. I didn't think he'd have an opportunity to outplay DJ Wagner. I thought if it was a tie, the tie was going to go to Wagner. And then Reed was a guy that I thought was good. I thought he was really good. But I thought 3-4 year guy, but the way he's been playing has been crazy. And I had a conversation with my brother. I'm just guessing here that the second team beats the first team in scrimmages and practice. In your opinion, who is the best prospect on Kentucky's team right now?
Ooh, oh boy. Dillingham would be my answer, but I have reservation. Dillingham has the look when you watch him that he makes the most difference on the basketball court. Reed Sheppard may have the most polished game in the sense that what he does well at the college level is what he will do well at the NBA level, presumably. Dillingham's going to have some ups, some downs, but he's just got this upside that I don't think Edwards or Wagner have, and I don't think Sheppard is going to try to influence a game that same way. I'm in some chats that talk about comparisons, and comparisons are an imperfect art. By no means am I faulting anyone for making a comparison. And they talk about De'Aaron Fox, and I think that's a little rich in the sense of Fox is unbelievably fast, and he had more dynamism than does Rob Dillingham. But I may have shorted him in with my comparison that I came into the year with of Terquavion Smith. I think Terquavion Smith or Bones Highland, that archetype of player, Dillingham's a better point guard than those two are. Those guys were more scorers that handled the rock in college. And I think he's a better point guard than I even knew he could be. And he makes a lot of difference. And he's leading the team that is the best at taking care of the ball in basketball. And they're led by freshmen. And that really has impressed me tremendously. And then I think he's done a great job getting Reed Sheppard those shots. Like Reed Sheppard wouldn't be shooting 63% from three without Rob Dillingham. It's a symbiotic relationship, but that I think one is more helpful to the other. And I think Dillingham's creating for his teammates very, very well.
4.4 assist turnover ratio for Rob Dillingham, a guy that I don't think anyone thought he was a good decision maker, setup guy, point guard. I mean, when you talk about Rob Dillingham, everyone talked about how electric he was, the scoring, the shifty ball handling, and so on. And I mean, there were some flashes that he could pass, but he looks like a phenomenal passer so far through 7 games. But he just has this flair to the game, but that's the part that hasn't stood out to me the most. It's just the fact that he looks like he is a pace setter, a game changer when he enters the game. Like things look different when he's on the court. Everyone seems to look better. And I just think that he's really helped himself a lot. I think he's really helped himself a lot. And so it could be interesting because I think that Edwards is still going to be a first round pick, even though he's been disappointing to me. And I want to get your opinion on Edwards. Do you think that he's sacrificing, or do you think that this is who he is? Because right now, he looks like he's very, very comfortable being a complimentary role player. He shot the ball well from three the last 3 games, but he just doesn't seem to have that alpha or that lead, that mentality that you want of a guy that you would project as a number 1 pick. And especially a game against Kansas, he took 6 shots, didn't make any of them, but only 6 shots. I don't think he's taken double figure shots. If he has, it's only been like 1 game. But is he sacrificing like Kentucky players normally do?
I think he's could be better than what he's shown, like you're alluding to. Like you saw this many times. Tyrese Maxey is probably the most recent prime example. But quite frankly, I have never been high on Justin Edwards. I watched the blue-white scrimmage for Kentucky, and I watched with one of my very good friends. And we watched a ton of college basketball, but we talk about the NBA draft a lot. And my overarching assessment was he can't dribble. Like, I don't think Justin Edwards can dribble. I don't think he's a very good shooter. I think he can improve that. He's got a great body for the NBA. His activity is impressive. His selflessness is nice. But I think there's a reason that the other players are standing out more because they're better players right now. I mean, I know that's probably not the thing that people want to hear, and it's going to sound all harsh. But if you're evaluating and you're taking a top 10 pick, What's to sell me on other than athleticism right now? I don't feel like he's got any skill set that's really shown well, whereas all these other players, even DJ Wagner to an extent, has shown, hey, he can create shots for himself. And I'm a little lower on him anyway. But Justin Edwards, from the very first time I saw him, I felt like he was kind of getting the Kentucky boost in recruiting that sometimes follows people to a negative side of the NBA draft, where they're like, oh, he didn't do much at Kentucky, but he'll be good in the NBA because he can do more. I think it's the opposite when recruiting. It's like, oh, well, he's going to Kentucky, therefore he must be really, really good. I don't see it. I hope I'm wrong. But he just doesn't. He doesn't create shots for himself. He's not a good shooter. So if he's a defensively oriented player who rebounds the ball,
he doesn't. He averages less
like,
rebounds than Rob Dillingham right now.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's just there's not production. Like, is he Isaac Okoro? Like, I don't know. It's a different skill set, but like if you're thinking of recent players that have been drafted for defensive upside and activity, I don't know. I'm a skeptic for sure.
Yeah, I get it. I knew there was going to be someone that was going to really, really have to sacrifice. I didn't think it would be Wagner, but I definitely didn't think it would be Edwards. He was a guy, like I said, I had him number one. I thought he was a guy that didn't do anything great, but I thought he did enough of everything. And I felt like if he showed promise as a shooter, and I was thinking 36, 37% or more from three, with his size and the fact that teams really value wings in a league that is starving for wings, then I thought he could be the number one pick in a wide open draft, but he just doesn't have the same impact as other players. All right, when we return, I want to get Leif's opinion on some of the other games from the SEC ACC challenge. I don't know if I should say SEC ACC or ACC SEC challenge. I didn't keep track of which conference won the majority of the games.
It was a 7-7 split.
Oh, so I guess I can just go by every time I mention it, I can just flip. All right, when we return, I'll get Leif's opinion on some other players that stood out. But I want to talk to you about FanDuel, because as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. And right now, if you are a new customer, you get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. Any winning $5 money line bet, that is $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's not a better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, overs, unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL and Locked On. Also, I wanted to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts from Locked On. Also, we have our national shows that cover every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, second segment. What other game stood out to you, and what other players do you feel like in this SEC ACC challenge have helped their draft stock? I know I have a couple in mind that I wanted to get your opinion on.
I'll go with one guy who had an outrageous stat line, and then a guy whose stat line wouldn't wow you, but if you watch the game, the skill set really impresses you. I'll go with Dalton Knecht. Had 37 points on tremendous efficiency against North Carolina in a loss. Carolina shot unbelievably well in the first half. Like, they could not miss. They even had a bank shot that was from the left wing that hit like the right side of the glass and somehow went in. Like, it was one of the weirdest shots I've ever seen. Like, it was one of those days where you just don't miss. But Dalton Knecht was impressive because Harrison Ingram, for all the flack we've given him as like, oh, he could have been a one and done based off where he was projected, whether that's fair or not, when he was at Stanford, he's a grown man defensively. He's a big boy. And he guarded Dalton Knecht.
His body looks great this year.
Yeah, I think he's someone who actually has improved his stock. He's shooting the ball very well, and it's got way more arc than it had previously. As someone who watched Stanford a lot, he would have frustrated me with the lack of arc, and now he's really shooting the ball well. But Dalton Knecht scored against him. He scored against Cormac Ryan. He's older, which some people will hold him back, but he can shoot the basketball. He scores in a plethora of ways. He doesn't have a great handle, but
He gets
he's
to his
putting people
spots
on
though.
yeah, he's putting people on real alert of saying like I can score the basketball no matter what level of basketball you're putting me at. Like for Northern Colorado, he scored 20 a game. At Tennessee, he's scoring basically 20 a game.
Yeah, no, he was giving out buckets and he couldn't miss. I hate the fact that he ended the game on the sideline. I mean, I didn't see the exact injury. I think I must have turned my head and my wife was watching the game and she was like, "Oh my gosh, he's in pain." And then every time they showed him on the bench, he just looked like he was in pain. So hopefully he's all
Ankle
right.
injury.
Yeah, I haven't heard the severity of it, but hey man, we talked about him the last time we were on. I thought he's someone that improved his draft stock early, even before this challenge. I mean, he had a nice poster dunk early. I don't know if it was the first game or if it was a preseason
That was
game.
a scrimmage against Michigan State. He took that coast to coast and rocked it
Took
on
off.
someone.
So the athleticism is there. The shooting, even though like the first few games of the year, the shooting numbers weren't great from three, but he was at 38% from he's 38% shooter from deep at Northern Colorado. I think he's helped himself. He's someone, and I talked about it in the last episode. I talked about it in the episode with my brother. I think there's going to be a team that is selecting at the end of the first round that is going to say, we want someone that can come in and help us right now, that can maybe be in the back end of our rotation, because I think there's going to be a lot of guys that are selected in the lottery that are going to spend the season in the G League. But I think Knecht, I don't think his age is going to work against him. Maybe it will if if it's a team that's young and they're looking for upside. But I do think a veteran team that is looking for wing depth and shooting is going to take a flyer on him at the end of the first round if he keeps up playing the way he's played.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how the recent success of teams drafting at the tail end of the first round of taking older players impacts the future drafts, especially in a draft like this where there are very few certainties. Here's a player that I think really has improved his stock gradually, and we talked briefly about him one of the last times we were on, and you and I had a conversation. I think it was off the air a long time ago. Ryan Dunn, he's creeped up into the lottery on Tankathon. He's someone that I've had my eye on just because I watched a lot of Virginia basketball. I've done some work with a podcast that is centered around Virginia. So I've had my eyes on him for a while and knew of his defensive prowess. And yes, defense is his calling card. And I'm not sure he's a lottery guy for me necessarily, just because defensively, I think he's either the best or the second best defender in the country. I think it's between he and Ryan Kalkbrenner, and I don't think it's close between anyone else. I think Kevin McCullough is probably the third best. But Ryan Dunn's per 36 minutes blocks and steals, he averages 3.8 blocks and 3.8 steals per game per 36 minutes, and he plays 27.3 minutes, and he's like learning the offense. Like he played sparingly last year. Offensively, it's coming along. I watched the entirety of Virginia versus Texas A&M, and he hit 2 threes at the end of the shot clock where he was the catch and shoot guy. Arc's good, rotation's good. He's not a great shooter, but it's improving. His activity defensively is unbelievable. And I think there's a lot of places in the NBA where you can get a 6'8", 7'1" wingspan guy who's young, kind of learning, growing into his body, growing into his role. And I think stopping perimeter or scores is a big deal. If he can shoot better, there's a lot of places for him. And I think the appeal of Kevin McCullough we talked about last time, like Torrey Craig, Ryan Dunn's bigger, faster, more athletic, younger, and has more promise as a shooter just because it's a little unknown. Kevin McCullough there's 5 years of tape on it. And he's getting better, but he's still 28%. Ryan Dunn, this is his first year really shooting.
Is he getting better? I mean, McCullough's at 28%. I haven't looked at the numbers. I'm just going by what you said. And that was with 2 outlier shooting games to start the season. So that's
I think
scary.
he's getting better as a prospect is probably the better way to put it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, Tankathon still has
He's up
one.
to 29% now.
Whoa. I mean, but we talked about in the last episode, if he's at 29%, is that enough to get him in the first round? I don't know. All right. When we return, I'll get Leif's opinion on some other prospects that may have helped themselves. I know we talked about Harrison Ingram briefly, so I want to go a little bit more in depth on Harrison Ingram. I want to get Leif's opinion on Hunter Sallis and Baba Miller. Has he played? Is he playing? Is he doing anything?
He's playing. He's not putting up remarkable stat lines, though.
All right. When we return, we'll get Leif's opinion on those prospects. But I want to talk to you about Gametime because Gametime is the best place where you can get last minute tickets. They have flash deals, zone deals, easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. They have views from all the seats in the venue, and they have a lowest price guarantee. They have event cancellation protection and job loss protection. And with Gametime, you can get tickets because they have deals all the way up until the start of the event. They even have deals an hour after it starts. It is the best place to find last minute seats, find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, movie, theater, comedy, and more. And with zone deals, you get to pick the section, and Gametime picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. And Gametime has a guarantee. This is what's cool about Gametime. They have a guarantee, which means you'll always get the best price. And if you find tickets, and I'll repeat, if you find tickets in the same section or the same row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So what are the kids saying? Standing on business? Gametime is standing on business because they believe that you won't find a better deal. And if you do, they give you 110% of the difference. So download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA, has to be lowercase, and you can get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, and you can get $20 off. Download the Gametime app. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, last segment. Let's talk about Harrison Ingram. What has been your thoughts on Harrison Ingram? He looks like he made the right decision. Like a lot of players, I feel like transferred, and some are not in the same. I mean, they're in worse situations that they were in. Some it was basically a lateral move, but I think Harrison Ingram has gone from not on anybody's radar as a top 60 prospect to back in that range. What are your thoughts on Ingram?
I think he looks great. Like, Carolina is a far better team than they were last year. Harrison Ingram, I watched just about every game he played at Stanford. For those of you who don't know, I've watched every single Stanford football game for basically my entire life. Their basketball not far behind that. And Harrison Ingram, I had a lot of promise and hope for. And then I was disappointed because I became more into this draft world, and I would watch other players and I'd be like, man, I wish he could do that. Right now, all those wishes I've had look like they've become true just wearing Carolina blue. He's shooting the ball better. He's still someone who uses his strength to get into the post and pass out nicely. He's able to defend on the perimeter in multiple positions because he's coordinated. He's not super quick, but he's very coordinated and knows how to play defense positionally. I'm pretty impressed. I haven't really thought about where I'd rank him necessarily, but just watching, like, he looks markedly improved in many facets that we would say were negatives last year. Like, the shot was concerning. He didn't look like he created space. Now he's doing it on the inside and the perimeter, and he's still good at passing and situational basketball, which were some of his strengths, both as a draft prospect and just as someone who played good college basketball.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what he did this summer or where he spent the summer. I usually would see him in Dallas working out. I saw him quite a bit the summer going into his freshman year, and his body just looks great this year. Like he looks great. He looks like the guy that people thought he was going to be when he was so highly touted coming out of high school in Dallas. very, very smart kid. I remember like talking to different scouts about him last year about his decision. Should he stay at Stanford? Because it was a tough decision for him because if he stayed at Stanford, he thought at the time that he was going to have to play for a new coach because Stanford hasn't won in how long?
8 years since they made the tournament, and
Yeah,
I am
so
not pleased about the coach still being there when Mark Madsen was available.
yeah, so that was the thing. Like if he stays, and this was again at this time last year, if he stays, he's probably going to play for a new coach. So if you're thinking you're going to play for a new coach, then maybe it just makes sense to just transfer. And it's paid off. Like I said, his body looks good, and he's played really well. He's a guy that I'm curious to see like his role because he is best with the ball in his hands. That's how he was when he was in high school. But then he was such a poor shooter his first 2 years that if he wasn't in a situation where he had the ball in his hands, then it was kind of tough to justify putting him on the court. I mean, I think it would just take the perfect situation. I guess you can say that for anybody. But I do think that there may be a team that knows how to utilize his unique skill set. One of my knocks on him before was he was strong enough to like play in the post, but I just felt like he was such an inefficient scorer around the rim. And I thought he just lacked a lot of vertical pop. And there are some guys that are really good, like below the rim finishers, but I didn't think he was a good below the rim finisher, and I was concerned about his shot. But I think he's more so of a weapon. Another player that I want to talk about made a similar transfer, was a McDonald's All-American, transferred from the West Coast to the ACC, and that is Hunter Sallis, who's had some pretty good games. I know he had 24 points against Florida. One of the concerns about him was his outside shooting. He's shooting the ball well this year. What do you think about him and his draft stock?
Well, the first thing I'd say is if I'm a guard and I want to elevate my stock, I'm going to Wake Forest.
If I'm a transfer,
yeah,
I want to go to Wake Forest.
maybe if I'm a freshman, I'll go to Wake Forest too and really accelerate my stock. I mean, they've Appleby was not a really well-regarded player last year going to from Florida to Wake, and obviously they've had many successes in that regard. Alondas Williams, the other.
Jake LaRavia goes
LaRavia
from Indiana State to a first-round pick.
One that I would – okay, my main takeaway about Sallis is I think he was misused at Gonzaga just because they had players in the year Sallis was there that occupied what he's good at. Sallis is a really good athlete.
Yep.
When they pushed the pace, he wasn't the one doing it. Like they wanted Nolan Hickman to be the point guard. He wasn't a true point guard. And now they've got their true point guard in Nembhard. And so when the doors opened, I think he could have been good at Gonzaga, but when Nembhard started going there, you knew he had to transfer to really try to make a name for himself. I still think his shooting needs to improve. I never thought he was a great shooter, but I always thought he was better than he showed. Because he was playing spot minutes, and I think there's just a lot of pressure to prove yourself in spot minutes, especially on a team that plays high leverage games. And what I mean by that is Gonzaga anticipates winning at all times. They've made the Sweet 16 8 straight years, and that's really, really remarkable. So I think he's in a really good situation that's got a lot of floor spacing. They shoot a lot of threes. It allows him to play to his strengths as an athlete and someone who's able to be bullish and shoot the basketball. I think there's another guard in the ACC that's got a similar confidence right now. That's Judah Mintz. Mm-hmm. He's been really, really good. I saw him at the combine, as did you, and he felt like he had individual skills. He can get to the rim, but it just didn't look like, hey, he's an NBA player like some of the players did there. So I felt pretty confident he would return. It was just like no one knew what Syracuse was going to be without Boeheim. Well, Judah Mintz is really scoring the ball well. He's shooting it far better, and he's defensively becoming someone that I have confidence in being a point of attack guard defender in the NBA, which is something I wasn't sure I'd think at this point last year. Like in all of his games, he had 20 points, 26, 23, 15, 22, 4 against Chaminade, but he didn't really play very much. Or that aggressively, only shot 3 times, and then 33 against LSU. Judah Mintz is putting pressure on the rim, shooting far better from the free throw line, which was a concern. He's shooting 80% essentially, and he's racking up assists and steals. He's not a perfect prospect by any stretch of the imagination, but production is production, and he's doing it in more than just attacking the rim. That's the best thing he does, but I think he's starting to shoot better, and defensively, he's someone that I have more faith in.
Yeah, I want to get back to Sallis real fast, and I'll talk about Mintz. Hunter Sallis made 16 threes in his first 2 years at Gonzaga. He shot 26% from three as a freshman and 25% as a sophomore. This year, he's made 19 threes on 43 attempts, which is 44%. So he's shooting 6 threes per game. The biggest difference to me with Hunter, and again, I'm from Omaha, so I've followed Hunter closely. I've known his family, whatever. He did not look confident at Gonzaga last year. There were times where I thought he passed up open shots. There were times where he just did not look like he wanted to shoot the ball. I wouldn't say he was always a good shooter or great shooter, but he was always a really good mid-range shooter. And I see that now Wake Forest is giving him the freedom to shoot mid-range jumpers, get to his pull-up, and he's improved as a three-point shooter over the years. So he's a guy that I think you really have to consider as someone that has that if you were high on him going into his freshman year, you have to look at what he's done this year and say, that is the player that I thought was going to be a lot of people thought he was a first round draft pick. I saw him on some boards and he literally disappeared, and it was understandably so why he disappeared, because Gonzaga was just a poor fit. Didn't look like himself. And one of the things that he did, I actually talked to his mom about it, was he picked the right school. That's the biggest key, in my opinion, to this whole draft process. If you're highly touted, you have to pick the right school. Didn't pick it out of high school, but I think Wake was a great choice for him. And the numbers are showing 19 points per game, 50% from the floor, 44% from three. And then Judah Mintz is a guy that I think he's going to be like an acquired taste. His game is a little different. He's a bucket. He's a scorer. I think he's a good passer. I know, like last year, early in his freshman year, he was such a reluctant shooter from three. It was almost like he never wanted to take threes because he was so good at getting to his spots on the floaters and the mid-range and so on. But he's definitely had a strong start to his year. What do you think about him and J.J. Starling together?
I think Mintz is the alpha by a mile right now. Like J.J. Starling, I had high hopes for at Notre Dame. And I was like, you know what? Like another year, I want to see him as the guy. So he went to Syracuse, which is interesting. But I was like, oh, maybe they could be like a really interesting backcourt tandem, both scoring oriented, both athletic. But I watched Syracuse play both against LSU and against Tennessee. And Mintz just looks far better. JJ Starling's shot looks rocky to me. His confidence looks shaken, and Judah Mintz looks like he's on top of the world, knows how to get to the rim. He creates, he defensively is guarding the better player. His shot's not gorgeous, but he's shooting 43%. Like, I can't argue too much with that. And that's not someone that typically fits my archetype of preferred basketball players either. The one thing that caught my attention is when we were at the Combine, I talked to Reese Beekman briefly. I think I posted this. I'm not absolutely sure, but if you guys search my Twitter, this may be posted. I asked him, what players have impressed you that you've had to guard, because he's the reigning defensive player of the year in the ACC. And like, now you're playing some of the best athletes that are going in. Like I talked about Amari Baylor, and he's like, Judah Mintz is really hard to guard. I got a lot of respect for his game. And when I heard that, I kind of thought, wow, like Reese Beekman's choosing someone that's young and goes to the rim really hard. And he knows that, like, he's not a shooter yet. So that made me aware of just how crafty Judah Mintz is, along with his athleticism naturally.
Yeah, I agree. He's very crafty, gifted scorer, and sometimes those guys are the hardest to guard, even if you know what they're going to do. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. Once again, thank you, the listener, for making Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast your first listen of the day. Big shout out to Leif. It is late. It is very late or early, whichever way you look at it. Recording back-to-back episodes. Once again, it's Rafael, Barlowe with Leif, Thulin, and we are out. And hopefully everyone has a great weekend. And there's going to be a lot of good college basketball games this weekend, and we will be here to talk about them next week. Stay tuned.